thank you so much for having me over here. Before I want to start the presentation, just a big thank you to Sarah for having me on here. You're doing phenomenal work in the community, and hosting these sessions have done a tremendous amount to all the developers and the community itself. So thank you so much for all your hard work. I also actually want to take the opportunity now. We've got two special people on the call, and it's kind of convenient that this is the first VRT session after the awards. So a big shout out to Stuart and Keith for their MVP awards. Congrats, guys. You guys are pillars in the community. You do fantastic work, and it's most deserving achievement. So congrats, and keep going at it. Okay, fantastic. Let's just jump into it. My name is Nati Turtledove. I am a Power Platform developer. I've been developing in the Power Platform for over 6 years now. My background actually came from data development. I started using T-SQL, data warehousing, extracting information from Sage, and translating that into SQL models and putting that into Power BI. So that's kind of where I touched base on the Power Platform. And as I progressed through my data career, I started stumbling across Power Automate, Power Apps, and that's where I just fell for the platform as a whole. So I started shifting my data side into more solution side, and I've been developing in the platform ever since. Over the past recent months and years, I've kind of focused a lot more, not just on the development side, but on the governance and ALM side, trying to build a platform that's sustainable, that's stable and scalable, and taking all those methodologies and strategies into place, kind of produce those stable environments. So that's what we're going to be talking about, aligning quality assurance with Power Platform pipelines. Let's see it. The plan for today is to unpack this whole association with QA and Power Platform pipelines by discussing what quality assurance is, where it fits into an ALM model, what we kind of need to prep to build a proper QA session. And then we're going to also discuss Power Platform pipelines, the basics on how to get started with it, how they actually work, the data infrastructure for it, and how we can utilize that to combine the two together, following by a demo. So, what is quality assurance? This is really frustrating. Okay, I'm going to sincerely apologize. I'm going to share one more time and see if this works, because that is really not working. So this worked literally 5 minutes ago when we were testing it.
The wonderful world of live.
There we go. Can you all see it? Fantastic, great. So the first thing I had to do when I wanted to discuss what is quality assurance is I had to go ask ChatGPT. I wanted a real answer from some sort of AI. Yes, Sarah, sorry. I wanted some real answers from AI technology, being that was a hot topic. And ChatGPT spit out a pretty decent answer, saying that quality assurance is the process of ensuring that software standards meet its specific requirements, quality standards, through planning, designing, executing, and reporting tests to detect and prevent defects or errors in the software. And that's quite a lot to take in one paragraph, identifying what QA is. And it does a pretty good job at defining quality assurance steps, but it also kind of overlaps a bit into testing, UAT, etc. QA ideally falls in with our ALM infrastructure, where we've got our specified processes, our frameworks, our deployment strategies, etc. And it's a key point in an ALM framework to start building up quality solutions going forward to ensure that they are stable, scalable, and sustainable. So within QA itself, I've personally broken it down into 4 key topics, where we've got requirements and standards that need to be checked. This is kind of identifying the design requirements, if we've got appropriate naming convention, applied project management to solutions, etc., and overall key stakeholder requirements like user stories, ensuring that those categories are met in the specific stage. So that's what we're going to be checking in a QA session. We're also going to be identifying the code structure, ensuring that we've got comments in it, that it performs correctly, we don't have any delegation warnings, for example, and ultimately that we can prep that type of solution for a testing case. So we've ensured that it's met certain quality standards. It's now ready to be tested thoroughly to ensure that it's functional as well. And that's also where we touch base on performance, usability, and security. To ensure that it is functional in test plans, we need to make sure that we're monitoring it, that we've got some sort of deployment strategy to get there. We've applied error handling so we don't have certain bugs that appear out of nowhere, and we notify it straight away if bugs do appear. We're using correct publishers, we've got version control, we've got appropriate documentation and so forth. So that's a very nice key area in QA as well to kind of review before you go into the testing phase. And lastly, we've got general standards and procedures related to going from something like development environment to QA environment and how you actually proceed with QA checks. Fantastic. So where and when does Q quality assurance actually fit into our ALM strategy? So if we take an environment strategy, for example, where we've got a 4-tier environment, this is based on whether you take the Microsoft site's perspective, where they've got a 3-stage one, or you look at something like the ALM Accelerator, where you've got a 4-stage one as well. Ideally, we're looking at having a development environment where you do all your building, you play around in there, that's where all the actual hard work happens. And when you want to go through a quality assurance stage, we deploy to QA as either a managed solution or an unmanaged solution to start unpicking all those requirements through that checklist that we've defined. From there, once that's been complete, we've ensured that the solution is ready to be tested and confirmed that it's functional. We go through to user acceptance testing. All the tests occur in there, and then we go through to production, kind of closing that entire environment strategy loop. Right now, we're going to be focusing on identifying the difference between quality assurance and UAT, because those two kind of get aligned together at some points. They kind of swapped around. And from my past sessions, a lot of people have actually asked the question, why does QA fall before UAT? You also get certain processes where UAT comes before QA. And there's no real answer for that. My personal belief in it, and I could be completely wrong, but I feel that an ALM governance framework is kind of dependent on your processes. Yes, you've got best practices as well, but if your processes define that you should have a testing phase before quality assurance, then feel free to put a UAT environment stage before going the QA route. It's up to your processes, so it's very doable. And following that 3-stage environment strategy we saw, we get from Microsoft side, that disappeared quickly there, we can also combine a QA and UAT environment together to kind of consolidate actual quality assurance testing and user acceptance testing. So it's very dependent on the model of your process, how you want to tackle it. And there's no wrong or right way from this perspective. Fantastic. But the question, I had a lot of fun with this over here. And what is the difference between quality assurance and testing? So we put them into a boxing ring, and in our right-hand corner of quality assurance, it's a very objective approach to testing solutions and ensuring that certain standards are met, where we've got some sort of predefined requirements that we check against. We've got some sort of checklist saying we need to identify that these components have been adhered to, that these standards have been adhered to. We've got certain quality standards that need to be met. And the purpose of it is to ensure that when we do go to a UAT environment, that we're not logging massive issues within the solution, but we're identifying key cases where the solution doesn't meet certain requirements. So we're kind of trying to prevent or detect any possible defects or errors. And QA can also sometimes come alongside with a bit of internal testing, and we'll go into this a bit later on, where we do a bit more functional testing or something like a very informal peer review. It's that type of stage before going into a real test case scenario. Whereas if we look into our left-hand side with testing, it's a much more formal approach in terms of our deployment stages, where usually a product tester, a stakeholder, or an end user that will ultimately be using the product at a certain point is going to start testing it out. And what they'll most likely do is they'll utilize the user stories related to the project and vet the tests against that. So if a user can perform a certain function, that test will determine whether that function passes or fails, etc. So we can vet them against our user stories. It ensures that the solution meets certain technical requirements. And as I said, it's a much more formal approach to the testing aspect. However, we've got the little referee in the background, peer reviews. That fits amongst both of them. I personally like to line up with QA because I feel that it's performed by your fellow peers and colleagues in the office. It's a really informal approach where it's a pat on the shoulder, come have a look at my code, come show that this is the right way to do something. It's the phase where we receive positive or constructive feedback in terms of how we can improve the solution in the build, ask for any advice, and do a few quick checks before we go through that formal stage to quality assurance. But how do we actually build a decent QA scope? So I've broken it down into oh, this is really not working out great, the transitions, into 4 specific categories where we need to plan and identify our requirements and what we're going to be validating a QA check against. So are we going to be having a checklist? Are we going to be automating it? What are we going to be checking within the solution? Are we going to be checking standards? Are we going to be checking components, etc.? And once that's all been defined and we understand how that process is going to work, where do we plug it in? How do we apply it to a specific deployment stage in our ALM process? Who do we apply it to? And how do we reap the results from that? That's where we get to the review stage. Based on the outcomes of that application, what's the next steps? On that checklist that we planned out, does the solution meet certain requirements? Does it pass a QA session, etc.? And based on that review, how do we go forward? Do we apply another QA test? Do we go back to the drawing board, apply another version control there to fix certain bugs that appeared in QA? And at what point do we actually deploy them to UAT? So we've broken it down very simply over here. Under the planning section, we need a structured QA process. We need to define who's doing what, how it's going to work, when it fits into our ALM strategy, and what we're checking against. Same thing with application is we're going to complete the solution. We need to define when we're going to be completing a QA. We're going to be understanding does the solution pass QA and what happens after it does or fails the QA session. The way I've also set up previous checklists for quality assurance is I've taken a solution as a whole and broken it down into key objects and component areas. So for instance, when building a solution that incorporates Power Apps, incorporates Power Automate, etc., those are key components that we need to look against as well. But you've also got other aspects of the project. You've got project protocols that you need to kind of ensure that are being met, such as design standards, documentation. If you're using DevOps for user stories, making sure that that's all standardized as well. But for specific solution stuff, are we using solution checker? Do our objects match? Do we have object dependencies? What publishers are we using to deploy these solutions? Within Dataverse, do we have appropriate column types, applied security to our columns, or are we incorporating virtual tables? And the same thing with Power Apps and Power Automate. What processes are we using within Canvas apps? Are we commenting our code in a Canvas app? Have we avoided delegation warnings in model-driven apps? Have we checked our app checker? Do we have error handling in Power Automate? Have we got scope functions in Power Automate? Are we ensuring that we're not running 30-minute flows that are not optimized, retrieving thousands of records from data sources? All those kind of questions start to build up and create your QA checklist that you can now apply within your QA stage. So now we need to plug this into Power Platform pipelines. And to give you a brief overview of Power Platform pipelines, it's a nice, nifty tool that Microsoft released to us a couple of months ago that is a D365 application built on top of Dataverse. It's a fantastic ALM tool that allows us to deploy solutions from one environment to another, following really, really strict ALM protocols without having to export and re-import solutions. And it kind of offers that type of enablement for other makers and citizen developers to utilize ALM governance processes with minimum knowledge. So you're kind of enabling the future of makers to follow your designated procedures by using Power Platform pipelines. What's also nice is that it comes with your built-in security roles. And the biggest thing that I love is that it's built on top of Dataverse. That means everything that happens within Power Platform pipelines, aside from the API calls that cause it to trigger, all that information is stored in Dataverse, allowing us to interact with that, because Power Platform pipelines is a nice tool to have in order to utilize it for deployments. But how do we expand on that? How do we use that within other frameworks to automate other processes that we may need? So if we dive into the architecture of Power Platform pipelines, we've got 6 primary tables in Dataverse. We've got our artifacts table. So when we deploy a solution from one environment to another, it will download that artifact, store it in that table as a new version. We've also got our environments table. And if you're setting up pipelines, which we'll go into really briefly in the demo soon, we've got a really nice demo coming up, or at least I'd like to hope so. That's where we select what our dev environments are, what our target environments are, and that all sits in that table. We've got our pipeline table, what our actual pipelines that we're going to utilize. We've got our stage table, which defines how we're going to follow a deployment strategy. Are we going from dev to QA to UAT to prod, or dev, UAT, QA, prod, etc.? So that's all defined in the stage table. And then our stage runs table and our stage run sub operation table kind of accommodates all the data related to the deployment. So when you start deploying, we're going to be creating records in those tables saying it was deployed at this time by this user. It's got pre-deployment configuration applied. Here's the object IDs. Here's the stage run IDs. That's the core tables that we're going to be interacting with. Now, again, as I said, because the session is around QA with Power Platform pipelines, we can expand on that. It's not specific to quality assurance with Power Platform pipelines. It's very subjective to the specific topic, but you can apply the same principles to many, many other ALM concepts. So looking at something like the ALM accelerator, it's also built on top of quite a few Dataverse tables. Where similar, we've got our environment tables where all our environments are hosted. We've got a profile table related to associating projects with DevOps projects. We've got our deployment request table that's kind of equivalent to our state runs table. Step tables in terms of where we're sitting with deployments, user settings, and history tables, which is really nice. So you can see that because the data is all sitting there, we can actually start utilizing that data from both either Power Platform pipelines and ALM Accelerator to kind of expand on governance and processes that are more suitable for our needs. Let me scan that there. So just a brief description of how Power Platform pipelines should be run is we've got an unmanaged solution in our development environment. Using the pipelines, we can then deploy as a managed solution to a QA environment where we can comply with our QA checks. Same thing to our UAT where we do test scripts, and then finally into production. But again, we're focusing specifically now on going from dev to QA. So how do we interact with that information? So when we deploy from our dev environment to our QA environment, as I said, we're creating new records in the Power Platform pipelines state runs table. And before the extensibility features came out a couple of weeks ago, we were still able to interact with that data by running Power Automate flows, saying on record create on new record, trigger this flow, and we can also retrieve that type of data into Power Apps as well. So there was that extensibility over there already to start utilizing the data. And I don't know how clearly you can see this quick brief flow, but before extensibility, this is kind of how it worked. When a new row is added, modified, or deleted, simply send an email. So that functionality still existed over there. But we can now expand on it with all these new tools, such as scheduled deployments, before and after executions, and approvals. Now, approvals is not really specific to Power Platform pipelines, and I don't want to get too much into the new features, although we are going to utilize them a bit in the demo. But you don't necessarily need to use approvals for deployments. You can set up your own type of approval schemes, something similar to what you can do with SharePoint, for instance. So it's not necessarily required a requirement to use approvals of Power Platform pipelines. When I last did a session on the ALM Accelerator versus Power Platform pipelines, one of the biggest cons to use the pipelines was the fact that you couldn't associate DevOps projects to your deployments. There was very minimum scalability, and there was no front-end deployment manager to actually oversee who's doing what needs deployment, what's currently undergoing deployment, etc. But with the extensibility features now, we can start aligning those stages, QA, UAT, etc., into these environments, because we can start associating stuff through the automation to DevOps. We can start scaling on different processes within ALM based on Power Platform pipelines, and we can even create our own custom applications interacting with that data. So the next biggest thing is a demo. I would love that. I'm going to share my screen quickly. Let me know when you can all see it. Any thumbs ups? Actually, I can't see thumbs up anymore. Okay, I'm assuming we can all see it. Fantastic. So just a brief description on Power Platform pipelines. Right now, I'm sitting in my production environment, and I've configured, I'm sitting in the admin configuration app. Under environments, I've got my internal prod, QA, sandbox, and UAT. If you want to go set up one, you click on new, you assign, you give it a name, what type it is, whether it's development or target, and assign it to an environment ID. If you do want to go a bit more into depth on how to get started with Power Platform pipelines and extensibility, I've got a QR code at the end of the demo where we can where you can see some videos on how to get started with it. But similar to our environments, we've created a new pipeline over here. We've set our internal sandbox as our development environment, and we've got our stage deployments going from dev to QA to UAT and to production. Now, I've got two pipelines set up specifically for this demo. We've got our internal development pipeline, which we can see over here. Pre-deployment is not configured, and I've got another test pipeline where pre-deployment is configured. So let's quickly take a look as well into the data architecture of Power Platform pipelines. So the solution itself is made up of three segmented solutions. We've got our anchor solution, our model app, and we've got our deployment metadata. So all the tables relating to Power Platform pipelines exist over here. And if we head over to, for instance, our stage runs table, we can actually see all historical events and all the dates relating to our deployments over here. So for instance, we've got our latest solution artifact for our PMP solution. We can see it was created by myself, created on this date, who the deployment user was. If we scroll all the way to the end, we can see other pre-configurations applied, such as are they cancelled with flows, etc. Do we have pre-deployment configuration applied? And you can see all the target environments as well. So we're starting to get a deeper knowledge of the data is there. How do we use that to expand on our processes and start aligning stuff like quality assurance with deployments? So that's where I took the stance to go and build up a Canvas app that kind of uses these tables and allows us to apply quality assurance on top of that. So this is the solution that I built. In my solution, I've got 9 tables, the 4 of which are actually based on Power Platform pipelines. So we can see we've got the artifact, environment, stage runs, and our, that's actually from environment variables. But using these 3 tables, I'm able to pick up the latest deployed solution, what environment it's sitting in, who deployed it, when it was deployed, did it pass, did it fail? And based on that, now we can start configuring QA sessions and assigning them to individuals. So we've got an app over here, and it looks like this. And I'm going to point us towards the D365 Power Platform User Group Demo 1, because that's sitting at version 11 right now. So we can see it's sitting at version 11. I'm going to head over into my sandbox environment. And we're going to deploy it quickly. And whilst deploying, we're going to go over the actual Canvas app and see what it offers, what it accommodates, etc. So for this specific purpose, we're going to be using our internal development pipeline because we've got no pre-configuration set up. We just want to deploy a solution from development to QA, and we'll say deploy. And now you also get a chance to see all the new features in Power Platform pipelines. We've got the ability to schedule deployments for now or later. And we've also got the ability to, when it starts to load, to add release notes as well, which I'm just going to add in test, but that's if it decides to load. Validating. Oh, it's taking its time. Okay, well, while that's loading, let's go take a look back at the Canvas app and we'll get back to this in a few seconds. So when we were talking about building quality assurance as its own process, we're defining where it fits in, what needs to be assessed, and how it needs to be assessed. So that's where we talk about managed items. So in the solution, I've got an app that acts as a checklist with different categories and different topics per category that need to be kind of assessed within a QA. So for instance, for Power Apps, I want to be checking accessibility within standards. I want to be checking my icons, app monitor, make sure that all my code is commented and we've got appropriate code format in there. And with this type of stuff, we can either edit, we can assign it different categories, give it different names, add further descriptions as to what needs to be checked about it. We can delete items from this checklist. We can add more generic items to a checklist, and if something doesn't fit under our normal assessment category, we can add new ones, and we can manage them in our assessment categories over here, where we can delete them as a whole. And this is a kind of a checklist that governs how we proceed with our QA sessions when we do get to that point of deployments. So let's go back to our deployment. We're sitting at version 1.12, and let's deploy that. Fantastic. That's going to run in the background. And we're just going to go back to our solution again, and we're going to head on home. So the way that this app is working is we're using our I think our artifacts table to pull out the latest version. So we're pulling our budget tab. Our latest version is 1.0.0.4, and we're pulling all the information about that deployment, when it was last deployed. So it was deployed to QA on this date at this specific time, who created the solution, what environment did it come from, etc. So that's using the artifact table, the stage runs table, and the environment table. And that's because I've also predefined my QA environment over here through an environment variable. So I know that this is looking at all solutions that have been deployed to my quality assurance environment. That's still deploying. Once it has finished deploying, we've got the ability to go and create a new version review. So we'd head over to our solution. Let's wait for it to deploy. We'll get there later. And obviously, with certain solutions, we don't want to apply an entire checklist. Stuff like if you're building a solution that only incorporates Power Apps and Power Automate, there's no reason in including a checklist for Power Virtual Agents or Power Pages. It makes no sense. So we practically go say we're going to add Dataverse because it's built on top of Dataverse. We're going to add our Power Apps checklist, our Power Automate checklist, solution, and general project governance. That's still applying there. And then when we're ready, we'll add any additional notes there. We can assign it to a specific review date when we want the developer to apply the quality assurance check and when it needs to be submitted by. And then we can also assign it to individuals. So if I assign it to myself, we can click over there. I'm just waiting for this to finish. I think it may be my network that it's why it's so slow, but let's hope for the best that it happens soon. We'll come back and create a new one in a few seconds. The nice thing about it as well is that because we're using our artifacts table, we can pull up all historical versions of it as well. So for instance, our debtors cash, which one? Our KPI management, or yeah, let's go to KPI management. We can go to history and we can see all previous versions that were deployed to quality assurance, when they were deployed, who the reviewer was, who the developer was, and basically see if it was a successful deployment, a failed QA session, any appropriate notes, and actually dive into the checklist itself into a bit more detail. So for the KPI management solution, we can review our checklist on Power Apps, project stuff, Dataverse, and solution items that it was graded against. That is still deploying. You know what, I'm going to go and just create a new one against our clock component because that makes more sense. So we'll create a new one on top of Dataverse, Power Apps, and Power Automate. Just for the sake of it, we'll sign it for the 29th, and then we'll sign it to myself. Fantastic. So this is going to go ahead now and create the solution for us. Now we can see that our clock timer component is now pending because it's got an active reviewer assigned to it, and we've got an active developer assigned to it. So if we go over into our solution, we've got our specific checklist categories we've applied to it for our QA session. And if we head over to each different category, we've got all our topics and our actual checklist items in those categories. At the same time, if something is missing from the standard checklist, we can always go and add new ones if need be and grade them directly in over here. We can delete them, we can add feedback, we can save and come back later, and then we can submit when we're finished. The way that I've structured it for now, and again, this is from a personal perspective, if you were to go and expand on this on your own and build your own type of solutions out there, is I'm scoring it on a grade of 1 to 3, whereas 1 is bad, 2 is okay, 3 is perfect, and also giving the ability to pass or fail individual aspects of a checklist. So for instance, for accessibility with standards, let's give this a grade 1 out of 3. App icon will grade it a 3 out of 3 and app monitor 2. And we'll just say that they all pass. Now what I'm doing is I'm actually counting the amount of items in that checklist, and I'm adding up the score in total. So I've got 1, 4, 6. So right now we've got 6 total points that our solution has been scored against. So if I were to go to submit, right now it's grading my solution at a 4.77% rate, which is not great. And the reason why is because I've got 42 QA items in total in my checklist, and graded against a 3-tier grading score, I need to kind of accommodate 126 points in total. And right now, when you've got 6. So if I were to move that to, say, 120, it'd bring it up to 95. And then I can either pass or fail it as well, provide any feedback. When we're ready, we can submit the QA session. It will notify the appropriate developer, and we can see that a previous version has now been complete. We can create a new one if need be, and we can actually review the previous one as well. I just want to double check. There we go, it's successfully deployed. So we're keeping an eye on our version control over here. We're sitting at version 11. If we do refresh, let's just refresh the browser. You can see now we've gone to version 12, and we can practically do the exact same thing that was deployed right now at 4:27 UK time, and we can apply the exact same QA process on top of that. So that's how the actual QA assessment or that our build functions, the purpose of it, and how I intend to use it for quality assurance with Power Platform pipelines. But now with extensibility, we can take it a step further. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to deploy a new solution called PMP Demo Solution. We're going to use our test pipeline. And the reason why we're doing that is because we've enabled extensibility on our QA session. So if we say deploy here, let's get our, I'm going to say yes, and now. Let's see if it deploys. While that's validating, in order to associate it with the DevOps project, I've gone and let's say deploy. I've gone and created a new DevOps project called Demo. And now it's going to start deploying it through extensibility. The downside about this so far is that you can see right now it's saying currently exporting the artifacts version, which means it's downloading the zip file, and then it's going to start triggering the extensibility. But sometimes that extensibility can be triggered beforehand. So if we do kind of approve it or follow those processes, then it may fail to complete the deployment. So while that's deploying, let's head back over here. We've got a flow called associate, and there we go, it's busy running now. So the first thing that we're doing in this flow is we're requesting now the developer to associate it with a specific project. So right now we've got a do until, can't really see it, but it should send through a Power Automate card, which it's not really doing. Oh, don't you hate it when things don't work out according to plan? Let's go through it and make sure that it works properly. And make sure that our pipeline's set up. Pipelines, test pipeline, pre-deployment is configured, fantastic. Flow, get, validate, do until, post adaptive card. Yes, it should be working. Unless it's, oh, there we go. You know what, it's just not working in this browser, that's why. The Teams notifications come up in my actual desktop Teams app. So let's just refresh the browser one, see if that works. Which it's still not. Okay, I'm gonna have to share my whole screen. Fantastic. Let me know when you can see my whole screen. Great. So that extensibility now with the deployment has triggered a Power Automate flow to send an adaptive card to the user saying you've requested to deploy the solution now to quality assurance, but we've got no project associated with it. So how do we go and associate a project? So they're going to then type in the project name. And for argument's sake, now I'm just going to put test because that's an incorrect project name. We're going to associate, our flow is going to validate it, it's going to retrieve all active projects from DevOps, it's going to see, does this project actually exist? No, if it doesn't, sorry, you provided an invalid project, please provide an accurate one. So we're going to give it now our proper DevOps project name called Demo. We're going to associate it, and we should now receive an approval in a couple of seconds. Let's just go double check that it's running. Fantastic, there we go. And we should receive an approval now. Deployment request. And it's important to note that before we actually approve this, if we head over to our deployment over here, we can see that it's still pending and it hasn't actually deployed the solution and it's waiting on that confirmation so we can trigger an unbound action back to Dataverse to say this deployment is ready to now go into quality assurance because we've associated with the DevOps project, we've ensured that we've got the user stories and we're happy to continue now. So going back into Teams, we can click on approve and it's going to submit our response. Fantastic. Finalize as approved. And our flow continues and it's finished. Fantastic. So we look at our pre-deployment, we've deployed our solution, and because we approved our flow, we're using our perform unbound action where we're deploying a status code of 20, meaning that the pre-deployment configuration has been approved. We're updating the database table and it's saying we can continue with the deployment. But at the same time, we've also associated our DevOps project with the deployment as well now. So I haven't included it in some sort of UI framework, but what I did do is I queried the project from DevOps, and we've also been able to now validate that it exists. Once we have validated it exists, we have run a query, a DevOps query to retrieve all work items. Why is it not showing now? It should have shown. And it should retrieve all the DevOps work items. I don't know why it's not showing now. Oh, there we go. No, it decided to go over here. That's not good. Ah, because that's on the first stage. There we go. My apologies. I'm a bit tired. I went down a dark rabbit hole last night because I started building this and I'm like, I need to make it look really, really cool. So it was a 3 a.m. development cycle for me. So yeah, so because we've allocated a DevOps project to it, we've listed our queries and we've actually retrieved our related user stories from DevOps. So if you were to be applying this type of process not to QA but to UAT, we can actually create a user story, a UAT script in Excel, call it like that, based on all the user stories we have associated to the project, or we can even use Power Automate to start creating DevOps test cases and test plans directly in DevOps. That's how we can start associating the pipelines now into other categories aside from QA, such as UAT. And if we head over to our solution, we can see it was successfully deployed a couple of seconds ago as version 11. So again, if we head back into our app, let's just refresh it again quickly. When we look at our PMP solution, we're sitting at version 11, deployed a couple of minutes ago, and we've got the ability then to interact with it and apply quality assurance on top of that. Fantastic. So that is my demo. Let's get back to the presentation. So far, everyone's happy with that. You can see it. Everyone's thought I don't need to go back any steps. Fantastic. Now let's attempt to that when we load this presentation, it loads up again. By the way, if you do want to download that solution, I'll provide you with a link at the end, a link at the end of the session so you can go and review it. Let's head back over to the presentation. Fantastic. We can all see, yay, I've done a demo, right? Awesome. So we've gone through deploying a solution using Power Platform pipelines. We've seen how we can actually utilize the data from Dataverse in the solution in our own Canvas apps, through our own model-driven apps in Power Automate, and how we can extend that into services like Azure DevOps and start associating projects and combining an entire ALM ecosystem together based off deployment. So it's now scaling the potential of Power Platform pipelines compared to other tools like the ALM Accelerator and your build tools. We're keeping it in-house, and we've got that extensibility. So remember, we showed you this checklist, building that quality assurance. That now is associated with the build, where we incorporated that checklist into the solutions tables, being the assessment choice tables for the categories, the specific item tables, actual QA assessment details, and general assessment details. And that solution is then working on top of our Power Platform pipeline Dataverse tables, our environment table, stage table, and table run table. So that's where we're at as of now. There's still a lot more to come in terms of how we can associate the two. Specifically for that solution that I showed you, the nice thing would be to be able to associate multiple QA environments going forward, where you can select between an internal QA or a customer-facing QA, etc., and have that type of scalability to branch out. It would be nice to now include extensibility for notifications, for approvals, and for integration with third-party services. I'd also like to make an ALM Accelerator version. As you can see, it's also based on Dataverse, so it's really, really simple. And yeah, with extensibility, how do we utilize other sort of tools where we can branch into our ALM frameworks? So that's where we can head to with the future, with Power Platform pipelines and aligning it with QA, UAT, etc. In terms of other tools out there, there is a fantastic tool if you don't want to specifically use Power Platform pipelines, but there's something called the Code Review tool by the PowerCat team. It's a fantastic solution that integrates with Dataverse, with your solutions as well. You can actually import MSAPP files into it, or you can use direct Dataverse solutions. You can even upload zip files, which is really cool. And the nice thing about it is that it actually accesses your app checker. So you can go down into detail, control per control, and actually see the code and create assessments and grades on top of that, and assign it and pass and fails and so forth. So it's a really, really nifty tool to use if you're looking to align other processes with other type of tools. If you do want to download it, there's a nice little QR code that you can scan there. And other than that, that is it from me. So if you've got any questions, feel free to shout. I know that's a lot to take in. Yeah, and if you want to download the solution, there's the big QR code. If you want to check out any other videos on how to get started with Power Platform pipelines, you can scan the small little QR code there. But yeah, thank you so much for having me. It was a treat to show this to you, and hopefully we can continue growing together.
Thanks, Nati. That was a really good looking presentation as well.
All the snags, I don't know what's going on there.
Excellent SharePoint skills. Has anybody got any questions or comments to add?
Just a comment from me, just to say, well, thanks for the mention at the start there, Nati. Appreciate that. But no, excellent presentation, lots of food for thought, and I love how you've extended things as well. I think it's, yeah, there's so many possibilities. It's really powerful stuff. So yeah, thank you for that.
Thank you for those words. I think that's the kind of the route that I wanted to take. As I said in the beginning, I'm talking about aligning quality assurance with Power Platform pipelines, but it's so much more than that. It's not specific to those topics. You can extend the functionality to any other processes involved in an ALM framework, and and assigning it to like DevOps and creating test cases and test plans through extensibility just shows how you can expand it. Well, we might have gone slightly off topic, I know that, but we're still aligning the two together at the end.
No, it's great. No, really, really good. Thanks again.
Thank you. Yeah.
Stuart, you had your mic on and off then. Were you waiting to comment?
Yeah, I must have pressed the off button by mistake, sorry. It was just a question. I noticed that there's also post-deployment steps in the action that you call at the start. I haven't had a chance to play with them yet. Do you know if they work, or are they kind of there and do nothing at the moment?
Yes. Thank you for reminding me. I missed that out in my demo. My solution completed deployment. I've got a flow over here.
Oh, they do work. Awesome.
On deployment complete. And what that's doing is when the deployment has been complete, it's notifying a user over here to say, with an adaptive card, let's see, chat, deployment successful to QA, you now need to associate it and start a solution assessment. So if you click on that, it opens up our solution assessment app. And that happens through, again, the extensibility where our event triggers in Dataverse, we're using our on deployment complete. We can again retrieve the stage IDs and do what we want with it.
Excellent. Yeah, I was looking at the documentation just a few days back, and the documentation talks about the pre-deployments, but nothing about the post-deployment. So yeah, it's nice that they work. I was a bit worried that they'd kind of sneak something out and it wasn't quite ready and didn't do anything. But yeah, I've got some use cases for this on the project I'm working on now, actually. So great to see that working. Thank you.
That was my rabbit hole last night because I really wanted to do some on deployment completion, and the documentation was very, very vague about how you can do it. Other thing that's lacking is that even though you can define what stages are configured for pre-deployment configuration, that still triggers your event actions. So for instance, if in my first deployment using my internal pipeline, I deployed to QA, that would still technically trigger my associate with DevOps flow, my approval flows, and so forth, because it's not actually looking at pre-deployment configuration settings for some reason. That's a little bug in my opinion there. So I've got a bit of a condition that if it's equal to that, then proceed. Otherwise, don't do anything. So that I think the documentation still needs a bit more work, but hopefully that will come in the future. It's still exciting times there.
I tackled that one there, so that exact gap, by using trigger conditions.
Okay.
So when you trigger condition, there's a little bit in the documentation about how to target a specific stage. For me, that's not great because you want it to trigger most of the time.
Yeah.
But if you use a similar kind of format to what's in there and just check what if pre-deployment is on or off, basically, then that works quite well. It's a bit of messing about. It's not as good as your standard like Dataverse list rows. Dataverse triggers, where you can say like select columns and filter columns and all that kind of stuff. But
it definitely needs a bit of.
It looks good overall. Yeah.
Love to it, but I think as of now, the capability that we can extend with it are phenomenal. Now we can go to new territories with it, which is fantastic.
Yeah, I know there's a lot of investment coming up in this as well. It is still officially a preview feature, so I'm hoping that we do see a bit more quite soon on this. But yeah, fantastic session, mate. Thank you very much. Really enjoyed it.
Thanks, I appreciate it.
Thanks, Stuart. Is there anybody else before we wrap up? think we're all good. Yeah, no, thank you, Nati. That was awesome presentation. So thanks very much, and thanks for everyone who came.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Cheers.
Take care. Bye
Bye.
all.